This is Julian Edelman from Games with Names. Fantasy football can be exhausting. I mean that literally. You're so anxious over your lineup, you can't fall asleep. Best way to deal with it is Unisom. There's a reason it's the #1 doctor-recommended over-the-counter sleep aid brand. It helps you fall asleep faster, wake up less, and feel refreshed in the morning. Plus, Unisom sleep tabs are clinically tested and proven effective and completely non-habit forming. So, make the ultimate sleeper pick and put it to bed with Unisom. Use as directed.
You know, when you hear Liberty Mutual Insurance, what do you think of? The Statue of Liberty? Limu, Emu, and Doug? Or maybe bundling your car and home insurance to save money? Yeah, because the thing is, Liberty Mutual looks out for you. They customize your car and home insurance to save you money. It's like a smart offensive coordinator with a dual-threat quarterback. They'll customize their play calling to fit his talents. Well, that's what Liberty Mutual does for you, building a playbook for you that goes above and beyond. Start your quote now at libertymutual.com.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1047 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, thanks for tuning in. We're at a point in the season where we generally have an idea if our teams are coasting the playoffs or if they're not. Some of your teams need variance to get there, some of them don't. So as you listen to the transactions this week, it's important to keep that thought in mind. I'm trying to help all sorts of teams here, not just the ones that are 8-1 and not just the ones that are 1-8. But hopefully there's a little something for you specifically on this week's episode. So let's get to it. Add Parker Washington. Travis Hunter was placed on IR after I did the 15 transactions episode last week. And then on Sunday, we had some more issues with that Jacksonville wide receiver room. De'Ami Brown suffered a concussion, so his status for week 10 is currently up in the air. Brian Thomas, if you watched that game, it looked like he had an ankle injury, and he was limping a little bit. So we'll see what happens with Thomas throughout this week. The last man standing, though, is Parker Washington. He came through for fantasy managers in week 9, securing 8 of 9 targets for 90 yards. He's now seen 19 targets over their last 2 games. Regardless of the status of these other pass catchers, with Hunter on IR, Washington should be rostered in most leagues. There's a lot of volume upside. Buy Woody Marks. The expectation for Woody Marks should not be that he's going to be a bell cow back in the NFL, at least this season. I don't think that's a rational expectation. With that being said, there's nothing wrong with his current role in this offense. He started getting more work back in week 4, and since then, he's averaged a 46% running back rush share per game rate and a 10% target share. During that time frame, according to PFF's expected fantasy points model, it says that Woody Marks should have been averaging 13.1 PPR points per game. He's been at 12.1. Guys, not every running back is going to be like Jahmyr Gibbs, or at least Jahmyr Gibbs not in week 9. Other Jahmyr Gibbs. It's okay to say that this guy might be a high-end RB3 or just a mid to low-end RB2. And not only that, Marks could just improve as he gets more reps in the NFL. And on top of that, the schedule for Houston, in my opinion, is set up really well specifically for Marks. We want 2 things for Woody Marks. We want an easy rush defense and a possible negative game script. If the matchup is good, then he'll have a chance to score more points even on limited opportunities. But if there's a negative game script, he's the one who's going to be on the field. Since week 4, according to Fantasy Life data, Marks has played 86% of the team's 2-minute snaps. Nick Chubb hasn't played any of them. The Texans get the Jags, Titans, Bills, Colts, Chiefs, Cardinals, Raiders, and Chargers through the end of the fantasy season. My numbers give their running backs a top 10 rest of season schedule. And there are some games in there where Woody Marks can really come through in a negative game script as a receiver. So coming off that poor showing against Denver, it might not be a bad idea if you can swap some bench assets for Woody Marks. Add JJ McCarthy. So I talked about this last week on the show, but it just felt like people were prematurely burying JJ McCarthy. He had that week 1 game against the Bears where he had a good second half, and then he faced Atlanta in week 2, and as we know now, that matchup is not nearly as easy as we thought back then. But he came through against the Lions. He finished the week in the top 10 among all qualified quarterbacks and completion rate over expected. He's now given fantasy managers 2 usable performances in 3 starts. Again, that one bad game happened against the Atlanta Falcons. They've surrendered the fewest passing yards over expected this year. And maybe you're sitting there and you're saying, well, he's only done well against the Bears and the Lions. Okay, fair. But here's the thing. Minnesota's rest of season schedule looks pretty great. According to my adjusted fantasy points allowed numbers, 75% of their remaining matchups, they're favorable matchups. They get games against the Commanders, Cowboys, Giants, and Lions to close out the season. He might not be an every week starter for your fantasy team, but you'll want to roster him for certain matchups. And what if he's just better than what everyone thought? Add Devin Singletary. Look, strictly from a process standpoint, I think it was logical to think that Tyrone Tracy would see the most work in that Giants backfield post Cam Scatterbo injury. Just last year, Tyrone Tracy showed us what he's capable of in week 5. After that point in time, we watched this same New York coaching staff give Tracy a 72% running back rush share per game and an 11% target share. His snap rate during that time frame was 68%. And that was on a team with Devin Singletary. Even last week when that Cam Scatterbo injury happened, Tracy had a 64% snap share. Devin Singletary was at 16%. So what did the Giants do in week 9? They gave Devin Singletary 7 more snaps than Tyrone Tracy. Tracy's 45% snap share was lower than all but one game post-breakout last season. Fantasy football can be so freaking frustrating sometimes. Now, Tracy wasn't 100% late in that game against San Francisco on Sunday. He was a little bit banged up. But the Giants were splitting work well before that. They gave Singletary more ground game stuff. Tyrone Tracy, he ran more routes, did a little bit more through the air. But because of that, Singletary is now more of a priority in week 10 than he was in week 9. Do be aware, though, that the Giants running backs have a pretty tough rest of season schedule. And I don't know if Devin Singletary is going to have tons of usability without a Tyrone Tracy injury. But for deeper formats or just for handcuffing purposes, you can add Devin Singletary. Sell Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman has had a low-key awesome season. He scored 20 plus PPR points in 3 straight games. He's got about a 24% target share per game rate on the entire season. And let's be honest, the fantasy football world, they're not really buying into it. Because we're sitting back and we're saying, at some point, this is going to crash, right? And it kind of did on Sunday against the Steelers for Daniel Jones, but Michael Pittman was still great. So you might be wondering, why are we selling Michael Pittman? And this is one of those transactions that needs a lot of context. If someone in your fantasy league fully understands Michael Pittman's value, then that's where this transaction is more usable. But more importantly, I would only be trading away Michael Pittman if I desperately needed a win. Like I said at the top, this time of year, you generally have an idea if your fantasy squads are playoff bound or not. If you're sitting there with Michael Pittman and you're 3-6, maybe even 4-5, and you really need a win, you might want to consider selling him. Because over the team's next 3 games, they get the Falcons, the Chiefs, and the Texans. Pre-Monday Night Football, the Chiefs and Texans are bottom 3 opponents for wide receivers by adjusted fantasy points allowed. The Falcons, they're a bottom 10 team. The Colts also have their bye in week 11. That means we've got a month before we might see typical Michael Pittman numbers. Again, this is not a move that I would feel good about making if I knew I was going to make the playoffs. The Colts get the 49ers and the Jags in weeks 16 and 17. Pittman should be fine there. And honestly, he should still be fine enough during this rough stretch. I'm just saying, if you need to invite a little bit more variance and sell a little high because Michael Pittman has been awesome, you might want to consider doing that given this upcoming stretch. Add Torrey Horton. If I'm being completely objective with you guys, which I always try to do, but entering week 9, Torrey Horton's yards per route run rate, not very good. It was sub 1. He had fewer than 1 yard per route run. That's not a strong number even for a rookie. But regardless of what the data is saying, I like Torrey Horton. I liked him a lot as a prospect. I talked about him this summer. I talked about him in season. He scored well in the ZAP model compared to his draft capital because he had strong collegiate production and he's athletic. The athleticism part isn't part of the ZAP model, but it all comes through with his production. So needless to say, I'm not overly surprised that he had a good week 9 with Cooper Kupp sidelined. And there's a chance he's going to have opportunity to build on that moving forward. I just want to say, even though you should be adding him, temper expectations. He's been below a 20% target share in all but one game this year, and that includes week 9. And Cooper Kupp, he at least has a chance to return this week. Hold Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. So on last week's 10 Trends episode, I talked about how Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt just hasn't been generating big plays. From weeks 1 through 5, Bill had a 10-plus yard run rate of 20.9%. From weeks 6 through 8, it was 2.6%. On Sunday night, he didn't have a run of 10 or more yards. That's been the major difference between early season Bill and current season Bill. He's not generating big plays, and that's resulted in just 17.6 PPR points over his last 4 games combined. Now that game on Sunday night, it was a little bit weird, but he did finish that game with only a 48% running back rush share. In his 4 games prior to that, he was around 78%. Volume through the air, that continues to be a problem. But he's typically getting 10 to 15, sometimes more, touches on the ground per game. My stance is that you shouldn't throw that kind of volume onto the waiver wire, even if the performance hasn't been there. We're going to likely see some more big plays from Bill in the coming weeks, just because regression tells us so. And the Commanders have a pretty good remaining schedule for running backs. They have games against the Dolphins, Giants, and Cowboys still remaining on that schedule. And with the Jaden Daniels injury and this season looking a little hopeless for Washington, would it really surprise you if the Commanders give Bill more work down the stretch to see what he's made of? To see what they have in him? So for now, he's someone to just hold. You obviously can't start him until you see more, but I do think he still deserves a bench spot. Add Theo Johnson. So Tucker Kraft managers, you're looking for a replacement on the waiver wire this week. And one of those replacements could be Theo Johnson. He's low-key getting it done this year. He's averaging 11.5 PPR points per game since Malik Neighbors' season-ending injury. That's a low-end tight end 1 number. He hasn't fallen below a 15% target share since that injury. And for what it's worth, New York has a top half schedule for tight ends rest of season and a top 10 one in the fantasy playoffs. Buy Aaron Jones. So I got to get this out of the way first. Aaron Jones did suffer a shoulder injury against the Lions on Sunday. The belief right now is that he could play next week, so that's all good. Before that injury, according to my friend Dwayne McFarland of Fantasy Life, Jones had a 77% snap share, a 68% route share, a 13% target share, and he had seen 70% of the team's rush attempts. He was operating very clearly as a top running back in that backfield, and he looked better than Jordan Mason. Very clearly, in my opinion. Hypothetically, let's say this type of usage continues if Aaron Jones is healthy. That could be huge in fantasy football. The Vikings get the Ravens and the Bears in Minnesota over their next 2 games. Those are fine opponents. Then it's 2 tough ones on the road against Green Bay and Seattle. But they close out the year, as I said earlier with JJ McCarthy, against the Commanders, the Cowboys, the Giants, and the Lions. It's hard to find a better end-of-season stretch than those 4 games. Chances are the teams with Aaron Jones, they're not like overjoyed to have him right now. So if you want to take a chance with some depth, I'd say go for it. Trade for Aaron Jones. Even if he misses some time in the short term, this is a long-term play. And because of that short-term injury, maybe you even get him cheaper. Add Colston Loveland. Colston Loveland had a big breakout in week 9, including that game-winning touchdown against the Bengals. He scored 29.8 PPR points. He had about a 22% target share. Those were both season highs by a good margin. He's now had back-to-back games with at least a 75% route share. Even before Cole Kmet left Sunday's game with a concussion, Loveland had a route share that was well over 60%. So he was trending in the right direction. Now, I do find this situation with Loveland pretty interesting. On one hand, you have a very talented prospect who finally showed us what he can do. He's getting more looks in his offense. On the other hand, his ceiling has been capped because of Cole Kmet, because he has his tight end teammate. And the Bears, they face the Bengals. Cincinnati has allowed 12 tight end touchdowns this year when no other team has allowed more than 6. But you guys know my philosophy by now. When you get a talented young player who shows out, whether it's via peripherals or just by production, you almost always want to buy into that player. So if Colston Loveland's on your waiver wire, he should be added this week. Sell DJ Moore. So for as awful as that Bengals defense has been, cornerback DJ Turner, he's kind of been excellent in coverage this year. And you can see that in the fantasy football stat sheets. Number 2 wide receivers, they're often outperforming the top wide receivers against the Bengals. We've seen some down games from Justin Jefferson, DK Metcalf, Brian Thomas, now Rome Odunze when they face the Bengals. Meanwhile, Marvin Mims had a big outing against them, Matthew Golden outscored Romeo Doubs, and DJ Moore had his best game of the season in Week 9 against the Bengals. And that's one reason as to why you should try to sell him now. He's had a really disappointing 2025. He's maxed out at just a 20% target share in a single game this year. Even Sunday's 23-point performance saw him with a sub 20% target share. He was averaging fewer than 10 PPR points per game heading into Week 9. The reason his numbers look so good is because he had a rushing touchdown, which is not sustainable, and a passing touchdown, which is even less sustainable. This kind of stuff is not going to happen every single week. And also, Moore looked like he hurt his hamstring in that game, but he did re-enter the game. There are just a lot of reasons here as to why I'm not very bullish on DJ Moore moving forward, despite what he did in Week 9. So if you can sell him high, definitely try to do that. Add Blake Corum. I'm pretty surprised that Blake Corum is still available in over 90% of Yahoo leagues. Corum's not seeing a ton of work through the air, but he is digging into Kyron Williams' workload in that offense. Since Week 4, Corum has a 32% running back rush share per game rate. And that includes a game where he screwed up early and he wasn't heard from again. You remove that game, his share moves up to 38%. Maybe your league isn't deep enough where you'd actually start Blake Corum. I totally get that. But he's got to be one of the higher end handcuffs in fantasy football right now, given the way LA is moving the ball. An injury to Kyron Williams, Corum would skyrocket through the running back ranks. This is your reminder that a lot of times players like Corum, they're better stashes than the random veteran wide receivers with like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 ceilings. Handcuffing and getting backup running backs, you should be adding those types of players way more frequently this time of year. And this is just your reminder for that. Add Christian Watson. So I try to avoid repeat transactions, and I did talk about Christian Watson last week. But he's still rostered in fewer than 30% of Yahoo leagues, and things are pretty interesting in Green Bay right now. They're coming off a really bad day offensively, and in that game against Carolina, they lost Matthew Golden to a shoulder injury and Tucker Kraft to an ACL. Matthew Golden could play next week. I have no idea how long he's going to be out, if at all, right now at the time of this recording. But with Tucker Kraft out, we're looking at the potential for more looks to go elsewhere. Watson saw a 75% route share in Week 9 that was up from 65% in Week 8. He had another 11% target share. If he can establish himself over the next week or two, games that could be without Golden and Jaden Reed, then there's some potential for him to get some production through the end of the year. Green Bay has the third best median opponent in the fantasy playoffs, according to my numbers. And they have the third best rest of season schedule for wide receivers too. So I do think Christian Watson should be rostered in more leagues. Add Marcus Mariota. So with Jaden Daniels set to miss an extended period of time, Marcus Mariota, he's back in our streaming lives. He's averaged almost 30 rushing yards per game in his 3 starts this year. He also scored a rushing touchdown. Last year in 2 games of relief for Daniels, we saw him with 34 and 56 rushing yards. There's a rushing floor with Marcus Mariota. And the schedule for Washington doesn't look that bad either. They'll get the Lions this week, making Mariota a viable streamer. Then they get the Dolphins, Broncos, Vikings, Giants, Eagles, and Cowboys. I think that we're going to see some usability from Marcus Mariota given that rushing backbone. Let's just hope that he gets Terry McLaurin back at some point. And for the record, if you're thinking about Sam Darnold, I do like Darnold more than Mariota. He's just something I've talked about before, and he's rostered in half of Yahoo leagues, given he was a top streamer last week. So if you already have someone like Sam Darnold on your roster, you don't need to add Marcus Mariota. But I do think Mariota is more of that traditional streamer type. Add the Cleveland Browns defense. So because of their bye week, the Browns are rostered in just 31% of Yahoo leagues. And they get the Jets this week. That game has a 36.5 point total. This season, New York has been the 7th best matchup for opposing defenses by adjusted fantasy points allowed. No matter who's under center for the Jets, the Browns make plenty of sense as a streaming choice. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you had subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back in your ears tomorrow with the weekly 10 Trends episode.
Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
Whether you're kicking off a campaign, gearing up for an event, or suiting up your team, 4imprint has the promo products to move your brand down the field. With thousands of customizable options like premium apparel, drinkware, tech totes, and giveaways, it's easy to score fan favorites that deliver impact. You'll get expert support, speedy delivery, and their 360-degree guarantee, so you can be 4imprint certain your order arrives exactly right on time. Explore more at 4imprint.com.
4imprint.